Have you ever known a murderer? Who were they? What did they do? How did you know them? Last year, a friend of mine shot and killed someone and then himself. All over a few $1,000s. I had known him almost my whole life. We grew up together and he lived just across the road from me. I could never have imagined him doing something like that. Geez, that sucks. Yes, my cousin killed a cop on a traffic stop. 8 hours manhunt. Cops shot him 8 times and now he's doing life in Oak Park Heights. Proof that the Juggernaut perk is OP. I had a friend from childhood. Had it rough. His mom was a drug-addicted prostitute and he was mocked when everyone found out about her getting busted. We were about age 8 or so. She ended up dying a couple years later. He was raised by his grandma who was unequipped to handle him at all. Ended up running with rougher and rougher crowds until he got sent to prison. He robbed a Domino's and shot the clerk to see what it feels like. Last time I saw him he was 15 and was showing off his new, illegal pistol. He turned into an awful human being, but growing up with him really gave me some perspective. So sad. We were friends, acquaintances in high school, would hang out in study hall, had dumb nicknames for each other. Couple years later, him and his friend were arrested. They broke into a garage where a guy was living. My friend beat him to death with a baseball bat, and they stole the $21 he had on him, cigarettes, and alcohol. I think he was sentenced to about 35 years in prison. Not positive. Definitely not positive. I had a class in high school, health, with this guy who I thought was cute. I tried flirting but was 14 and not too good at it. He ended up killing my friend's little sister like a year later and sending these weird cryptic messages to the local paper trying to be another Zodiac killer or something. It was 1986. I think he got life in prison. Whoa, I guess it's a good thing you sucked at flirting. A guy in my platoon came home from deployment and blew off some guy's head with a shotgun. We were at his house for a little party, and he got upset because he didn't kill anyone during our previous deployment, so he began talking about picking up some guy and killing him. We told him it was stupid, but he went off and got this guy and brought him into the house. We told the guy to leave and our friend not to be stupid about it, but he didn't listen. A little fight broke out and after we broke it up we began pushing the guy out of the house. Suddenly our friend yelled at us to get down, so we immediately did, and he blew off the guy's head. He bailed, and we called the cops. They picked him up and we had to testify against him in court. He got into drugs and was kicked out of his parents' house at 19. He and his buddy broke into the parents' house at night, grabbed baseball bats from the garage, and proceeded to beat the crap out of the parents and one sibling. The father died. The mother was hospitalized with brain damage. One brother was also hospitalized. I don't think he can speak anymore. The 8-year-old daughter hid. The twin brother to the beaten sibling hid and succeeded to call the cops. The murderers discussed who would kill the girl and twin. That's not even the whole story. These were family friends and I knew the murderer well. He was a troublemaker since we were very young. He loved his little sister more than anything, and then discussed a plan with his friend to kill her. Freaking hate the world sometimes. OMG, if this guy doesn't deserve the death penalty, nobody does. Went deer hunting with the regular group of people that I've been going with for years, plus a few of their friends. One guy, as it turns out, murdered a woman and did something indecent with her body. So yeah, that was fun to learn after the fact. A guy who was in the bush with us, and armed, somehow was a rehabilitated murderer. Yes, my former best friend. I knew he had some issues but I didn't think they were this extreme. His 3-month-old baby was crying non-stop. He hit the baby and it died. I sent him only one letter and received one reply. He knew he fricked up, knew he deserved to be where he was, and wished me well. I can't help but feel as though the mental health system failed him, but not nearly as much as he failed himself. Poor guy and kid. I know a woman who after having her child, couldn't stand it. For 3 months she hired a nanny and tried her most to avoid the child. She loved it but couldn't stand it. She's now a loving mother and great person, but to hear that was really crazy. Never knew how birth could freak up hormones like that. Well, I didn't know the guy that well, but he lived across the park from us when I was a kid. I maybe spoke to the guy once or twice at the most. Well, one day my dad and I leave to go get dinner, and when we come back the neighborhood is filled with cop cars and a big RV that says CSI on it. Apparently the guy got in an argument with his wife, slit her throat and beat her head in with a leg from a table. Kitchen manager and I hired Gary Zeiger to be swing dishwasher. He had no friends, showed complete lack of affect, quit after a few creepy months, went on to stalk my half-Japanese girlfriend, kill a JAL ground stewardess, and murdered the wife and son of a regular customer. He died shot in the face by unknown persons. My uncle, when I was 9, he murdered a woman by forcing a sock down her throat until she stopped breathing. He was high on some kind of drug and I assume she was on drugs, too. This was just the end to the stealing and fighting he was doing. His ex-girlfriend turned him into police, something most of my family hated, but my mother said she would have done herself if placed in that situation because it helped him. I know all these details because someone thought it would be a great idea to take a 9-year-old to court to hear how her uncle was a horrible, disgusting human being. My uncle is still in prison, but he's a better person. It doesn't take away that he murdered someone. He knows that. It's hard for me to explain, but I didn't really know him then. I only know him now. We had an exchange student from Peru at my high school who I played soccer with my sophomore year. He started dating a girl here and ended up getting a work visa after he graduated in order to go to culinary school nearby and stay with her. She ended up getting pregnant, and they hit a rough patch and broke up before she gave birth to their son. Shortly after the kid was born, the guy spiked his ex's drink to knock her out when she brought the kid over for a visit, and did the same to their infant son. He then strangled them both while they were unconscious and slit his wrists before calling 911. The paramedics ended up arriving before he died, and he's now serving life in prison. It was too late for the girl and their son. This all happened in my friend's home where the guy had been staying as an exchange student, and later as a culinary student. During his trial, he said that he wished he had died as well, because his religious beliefs state that when you die and cross over with those you love, you spend eternity with them in the afterlife. I'd be seriously pissed if I had to spend eternity with my murderer. Chicago cop in gang crimes unit, always carried a throwdown piece. If he didn't like you, he'd take you out and claim you drew on him. He used to brag about it. I just spent 2 minutes thinking WTF, drew on him like a party and you get drunk and color his face black with a marker. I worked at a prison in Florida many years ago. There were men there for various murders, either with life sentences or on death row. One in particular I will never forget. He was a real smart fellow, worked for NASA in some capacity. His wife harassed him about how much time he spent at work. He never took her anywhere. After years of nagging, he apparently snapped and murdered her. He cut her up into little pieces and sent some of her, mailed her body parts, to all of the places she nagged him about wanting to go. This would have been well before the internet was a thing. A very gruesome example of our malicious compliance. A very close friend of mine from childhood. We played on the same football teams and attended the same schools for about 15 years. We never talked after graduation 2009, and I moved to Seattle. He was arrested for torturing and murdering his stepdaughter who was less than 2 years old. Multiple broken bones, and several burns. They said the abuse had been happening for months. This was in early 2015, and he and the mother are still in jail awaiting trial. I cannot imagine him being the type of person to do something like that. He was always very quiet, and generally smart and well liked. I always check the news for updates on the trial, but it is taking forever. This one broke my heart like none other. A client of mine had both her father and her husband commit suicide by drinking antifreeze. You can disguise the taste of antifreeze in any sweet drink, such as soda or juice. BTW. Symptoms like stupor and slurred speech can be mistaken for drunkenness. As far as I know, no one has investigated whether or not these two deaths were foul play. One was an upperclassman I actually admired. The bright jock type that wasn't a complete jerk. He was a big partier and had a thing for Xanax. It got to the point where he'd show up to class high nearly every day. His parents sent him to a Christian school for a while and sent him back when that didn't work. Then he officially dropped out. His parents paid money to bail him out and send him to rehabs everywhere. Eventually they gave up and moved out of state so he couldn't scavenge off them anymore. He started burglarizing to get money for drugs, got caught and sent to county. Shortly after being released, he and a friend started a burglarizing spree. One house was occupied by a 91-year-old woman. He stabbed her multiple times and stole her jewelry and pills. He got caught the 1st of April. We all thought it was a joke when his younger brother posted the news. He was 23 years old then. Another was younger than me. He rode my bus as kids. He always had a bad temper and his future was always expected to go sour. After graduating he became a gangbanger and got addicted to M. He apparently stabbed a fellow gangbanger over an argument in the most ghetto trailer park in the city. He was 22 then. Sorry, but every time someone says gangbanger I just imagine someone who loves orgies. My brother had a friend from in Cub Scouts named Josh. Seemed like a normal, shy 8/9yo. He was adopted as an infant by a nice family and was the youngest kid by 5 or 6 years. A couple years after we moved to the next county over, we saw that Josh had come home from after school activities one night. Study W. A friend left at dinner time and said everything seemed fine. But after dinner Josh's parents went to watch TV. Josh called the police and said he was going to kill his parents, grabbed a shotgun from his dad's room and shot them both in the back of the head. On the couch, while waiting for trial, it was found that Josh's biological mom was a schizophrenic and had passed it on to him. He had no memory of the entire day apparently and didn't even remember waking up that morning. Last I heard he was given life in a mental facility and didn't fight the decision at all. Always felt bad for him and his family. They seemed like your normal, everyday suburban family. One of my coworkers, I'm a teacher, didn't show up for work. Which was weird because it was finals week and no teacher misses that week. Caught with child pee and admit to raping and killing a child. He put the body in a box and buried it on a mountain. We were told to tell the students he quit to the stress of finals. He is doing life in a max prison. I temporarily worked with a girl that abandoned her baby in a dumpster. It died. She was normal, a bit flaky, but until I saw her on the news I had no idea. I met a guy at a party in high school, maybe a year older than me. We made out and exchanged phone numbers. Fast forward 5 or so years, he had gotten married, had 2 kids, separated, then in a jealous rage, murdered his 2 babies and tried to kill his ex-wife. Third freaking story tonight about parents killing their own kids for no freaking reason. Got him. I knew someone whose aunt killed her husband via poison, cleaned him up, slept next to him, and called in the AM saying she woke up next to him unresponsive. She walks free to this day. I'm related by blood to a couple convicted murderers, but I have never met them. I used to write to the rapper Radix before he got sent to Florence ADX. Oh, and a friend from school is awaiting trial for first-degree murder. Allegedly beat a guy to death. I'm related to Ted Kaczynski. It's something my family doesn't really talk about, so I never even knew until I was 19. He's apparently my 3rd cousin 2x removed. I have a website that teaches Japanese. One of the members of the site came to one of our video filmings and we became friends. He even came up and shot a video called John's Day with George. His name is John. Eventually he divorced his wife and married one of the other members from our website. I decided to get in touch with him a few years later and his number didn't work. So I looked for him online and found out he had stabbed his new wife in the back with a knife and then killed their small dog in the microwave. He got caught at the Canadian border with self-made defense wounds. He got a 16-year sentence. I was going to write him a letter or call, but honestly I am too scared that he didn't just snap one day temporarily, but that he actually is now crazy. My wife was a nurse in a small inn outside of Chicago, Bolingbrook, where she worked with 2 separate murderers, who killed a total of 5 people. 1. Drew Peterson, local cop, convicted of killing his 3rd wife. His 4th wife is still missing, but widely presumed to be dead at his hand. My wife knew Drew casually, as most police and local staff get to know each other. Weird, though. We were watching a Dateline special about Drew and they showed the ear intake form from a time when his wife number 3 came to the ER for treatment after he beat her up. The form they showed on TV was in my wife's handwriting, with her signature, and a notation that police had been notified, as required when domestic abuse is suspected. My wife's assessment of Drew: he was always in butthole. 2. Marilyn Lamarck, a Naperville nurse who murdered her 3 children, rather than allow her doctor ex-husband to introduce them to his about-to-be new wife. My wife knew and worked with both Dr. Lamarck and Marilyn. My wife wasn't particularly fond of the doctor, but she did like Marilyn. She said she was just surprised that Marilyn didn't kill her husband instead of the kids. Trivia: the missing car of Drew Peterson's 4th wife was found within sight of, and less than 300 yards from, our house in Bolingbrook. Additional trivia: remember the cop who was found dead in Fox Lake, IL, a year or 2 ago? Sparked a huge manhunt. Then it turned out he was actually caught up in a financial scandal and had killed himself. Well, before we moved to Bolingbrook, we lived in Fox Lake, and that cop's body was found directly across Highway 12 from where we used to live. Our old house was prominent in a lot of the aerial shots while they were still looking for outside shooters. Note: we moved out of state a few years before any of the murders, so she had no involvement with the investigations. Thankfully, me wife's tendency to hang out with murderers seems to have abated since we left Illinois. I've told this on Reddit before. I took a newspaper class in high school, and the school only dedicated one single class to it, so the class was always a fun mix of kids from all 4 years, freshmen, seniors. We all got pretty close and hung out a lot, especially the juniors and seniors. I was a junior and a classmate a senior. We hung out almost every day for that entire school year. After he graduated and I became a senior and took the class again, he would come to visit almost daily during that class period. One day after a few months he just stopped coming and stopped answering texts. About a month after that, someone found out via some news website that our friend who disappeared had actually murdered somebody's mom. Basically, he really had romantic feelings for this girl and she had a boyfriend already, but he was the type that would still pretty much do anything she asked. One day she started telling him how much she wishes her mom wasn't around anymore and that she wished her mother was dead. He took it literally, visited said girl's house, waited until her mom went to bed. He stabbed her in the chest and shot her in the head. It took authorities almost a year to confirm it was him and arrest him. Which means that he most likely was hanging out with us the day of the night he murdered her, and then hung out with us the next day. Absolutely zero change in personality, which was the weirdest thing. I worked at the college where I got my BA as an office assistant for one of the departments in the business school. Making copies, booking travel, ordering office supplies, stuff like that. There was a professor I worked with who was semi-retired at the time, so he taught a couple of classes but didn't have an office on campus. I would see him or talk to him maybe once a week, if I was unlucky. The guy was a creep. He would blatantly look at women's breasts. He dyed his hair jet black and it looked so weird. He spit a ton when he talked, and he wore a ton of foundation. Like, when he moved out of his office they threw his phone away because so much makeup was caked onto it. He was also just generally really difficult to work with. For example, during finals weeks, obviously every professor needed a million copies made. Most of them would come in 2 or 3 days before a test, give me all their finals and instructions for copies, and then I would just call when they were done. But this guy would come to the office 30 minutes before his final and need 200 copies of his test made, and you better drop what you're doing right now to do it or he would yell at you and spit all over your desk. He never saved travel receipts like he knew he should and then yell at me when he didn't get reimbursed for everything he bought. Just generally made everything 5,000 times more difficult than it needed to be. And besides all of that, he was just an butthole. All of the professors were very nice to me, and we got along great, but he always made sure I knew he was the professor, and I was just a lowly office worker. He yelled to get what he wanted. He never took no for an answer, and basically everyone disliked him. I graduated and left that job about 3 years ago, and about 6 months ago I got a message on FB from another woman who worked in the office when I did. This professor had moved back east to Baltimore, where a really old cousin of his lived. He beat her over the head and killed her, and then staged her house to look like a robbery and called the police. There wasn't a ton of reporting on it that I can find, but it seems that he stood to inherit a bunch of money from her, but was found out pretty much immediately. Honestly, I can't say I'm surprised, but it was pretty crazy to find out. What an overall crappy person. Went to school with a guy who after graduating ended up murdering his wife in a crime of passion. Found out she was having an affair and shot her 18 times in their driveway. One of the most bright people you would ever meet. Won an award for designing a more efficient airplane wing in high school. Went on to be an engineer. Just went nuts. There was always something underlying though. My cousin shot and killed her husband. He was a known drunk and abusive. They had a fight one night where he pulled a shotgun on her. After a wrestling match with the gun, she shot him. It came down to kill or be killed. It was ruled self-defense and no charges were ever brought up on her. She still has a hard time dealing with it, as do their grown children. Although they don't blame her because they grew up seeing him abuse her. Very hard situation. I didn't know him per se, but my beautician's ex-husband. She worked from home and whenever I went over to get my eyebrows done or whatever he would just stand in the corner of the lounge room and stare at me and other clients. The two were trying to reconcile, which is why he was over at her place a lot. They had a young son who they sent abroad while they tried to resolve the conflict. Few weeks later I find out he stabbed her to death and hung himself in jail. Feel so bad for the kid. I lived in Illinois my freshman year of HS and went to school with a girl who, along with her boyfriend, killed her mom, stuffed her in a suitcase, and left her in a taxi in Bali. I didn't know her well and the general consensus was that she was batshit insane long before this incident took place, but we knew each other's names and smoked a few cigarettes together way back in 2009. I believe my great aunt was is. After she gave birth to her second child, she killed them both. She'd done her time and she's still alive, I think. She's in her 90s now and from what I hear she's still a bit crazy. That's really sad. I assume really bad postpartum depression psychosis. My dad's old neighbor killed her stalker. She had a restraining order against him and one day he starts walking up the steps to her apartment. She told him if he got any closer she would shoot him, and she did. Right in the face. She went to jail for 8 years. She blabbed on me and my stepbrother because we had a party while our parents were gone. I used the she's crazy excuse and got us out of it. That's kinda fricked up. She did what she legally could to be safe but a piece of paper ain't crap when the stalker is right in front of you. Apparently my so's uncle has killed people before and everyone in the family knows. They joke about it but it seems to be something he has seriously done. I shared a holding cell with one for an afternoon. My cousin killed his grandfather, not sure why. He just got out of prison for it though. I called him a friend. He was an alcoholic even in high school. His parents were kinda absentee as well, so as things went on in high school he started getting into some sketchy stuff. But we used to play football after school in a group all the time. He was super quiet a lot of the time, and he always referred to himself as a pacifist. He ended up killing another friend of mine pretty brutally. 9 frying pans and a 9 iron. Then hid the body, and refused to cooperate with police on where he hid him. Took over a year for him to finally cooperate and tell them where he hid his body. He is now in jail and will be until he's into his late 30s, which isn't long enough for what he did. I and many people I know are pretty much on site if we ever see him once he is out. All this over a simple argument. Buddy I went to high school with that was a few years older. Super nice guy, but left the party drunk and ran over a homeless person, then fled the scene. He didn't get arrested until a week later and we all wondered why he acted so weird for the 5 days leading up to his arrest. Felt bad for him because he made a bad decision. He also got shot in the arm by a stray bullet the week before. Not a good couple of weeks for him. My ex-girlfriend's friend, who I had begun to hang out with despite how weirded out I was by how gung-ho he was about guns. I just chalked it up to him being in the military and pushed past it. I was 21 and he killed a 17-year-old girl in cold blood. Anyways, one Friday we, 6 people, were all hanging out. He said he was going to go camping for the weekend, which in retrospect is a red flag. So after we hang out, he goes with a military friend of mine and execute one of their friends, also an acquaintance of mine, right outside her ex-boyfriend's house. At first we all thought the ex-boyfriend did it. She had been bragging about how she shot up his house as revenge. The police found out otherwise. Turns out she had paid my murderer friend to do it, and when she started bragging about it he executed her by shooting her in the back of the head. His other army buddy ended up ratting him out, and within 48 hours they had him behind bars. Work in corrections. Know lots of murderers. uncle's fiance's sister was murdered on Christmas this year by her then husband. Double homicide. 1 year baby boy orphaned for New Year's. Knew a kid in high school for all 4 years. We were pretty good friends. He was in my German class. Top of the class all 4 years as well as various other classes. On the lacrosse team and generally pretty well liked. The year after our senior year he was arrested for murdering his grandfather and stealing his car, leading police on a chase across state borders. I heard he got into H during senior year and the months following it. I had and still sorta do have a hard time believing it. So my friend brought over this hot Asian stripper to watch UFC one night. He was a bouncer at the club where she worked. He told me that she had killed her boyfriend in self-defense. Couple weeks later the chick is all over the news because it turns out that's not exactly what happened. She actually shot him in the face when he was asleep. Happened about 8 months ago. You can search it up by typing Phoenix high-rise shooting. The chick was pretty quiet the whole time she was at my house, but my god, her butt was incredible. My child's bio dad. Him and his friends shot 2 people. One died. It was gang related. He was in and out of juvie as a kid. Had a violent past. No parental guidance at all. I got out when I realized he wouldn't change. My kid doesn't know him or what he did. One day that's gonna be a hard story to tell. He has about 24 years left. He's wrote couple times. Doesn't seem to have any remorse. He's caught up in that prison life now. It's a shame. I asked my dad once if he had ever killed anyone. He was in the army for a few years and then in a bike gang and a coke dealer that would deal off a knife about 10 years before I was born. He said that wasn't a conversation one should have with their daughter. He used to sleep with a teddy bear he named Roller Polar, called us cute pet names, and would make up lyrics to rap songs. He also worked his butt off about 13 hours days to feed 3 kids as a single father because my mother never left the drug life. So yeah, IDK, what to really say. He was a bad man when he was younger but a decent father when he was old. Sorry I'm late, but this really touched me. People get into some crap when they're younger. I like to think having children changes a lot of people for the better. Your father sounds like a good man. You've encountered the lost treasure of Captain Gus Fishhead. Subscribe to receive some of his gold. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.